Welcome back. So in this lecture, let's talk about frames and handling them with Selenium WebDriver. Okay. So in the last class, we have seen all these actions class methods except drag and drop, right? So in this lecture, let's talk about frames and bring this drag and drop concept here. Okay. So let me go back to my Eclipse, create one more test called frames test. Test. Right. Now, so just like I'll use Chrome driver to invoke my test. Perfect. I do have one website to explain frames. Let me go over that. Yep. Let me do that in Firefox. Okay, so now I want to click on this element. Okay, this is my simple requirement. So now first let's see, can we able to do that or not? So when someone asks you to click on the element, it was very easy for us. We will use the developer tools. Okay, or I would simply say right click, inspect element, even without using Firebug and Firepath. So when I move my mouse, and this selects only text. Okay, if you move up, this selects entire box. So my ID is draggable, and I also have my ID here saying draggable, and now that's easy for me to click on it, right? Let's do that. Just follow me and you will understand the reason, like what is frames and why there is special handling for frames in Selenium WebDriver. So get, so that will hit and reach that URL. So once we reach that URL, I would simply say driver.findElement by dot ID, and this is draggable, right? Control C and place it here, and let's say easy displayed. Okay, or I would just say click on it. I know nothing happens when we click, but just make sure script passes successfully. That's it. So right now I'm doing this with general Firefox developer tool. Okay, if you want to have even that hands-on, once again I'm explaining, because till now we have done using Firebug and Firepath, right? You can just avoid that once you get hands-on with this testing. Right click, inspect element, and you also have spy here. Spy it on the entire box, and you see that ID draggable, and use that. So once you feel familiar with this web browser testing, please avoid Firebug and Firepath. Okay, it will stop your ability of thinking to a certain limit. If you use this Firebug developer tool and get your object by just seeing this blue highlighted line, just like how we do in Firepath, and that will give you enough confidence to create your own locators, right? So I have done in that way by selecting, right? Let me run this test. It was so simple test saying to hit that website and click on that box. That's it. And let's open a droppable window, and that's it. Test is completed, and you see test is failed. Why? It said unable to locate element with ID draggable. Weird, because we clearly have it here saying ID is draggable, and when you move your mouse, this entire box is getting selected, right? But if you see here, it says I am unable to locate element. So what's wrong here? Because let me open Firebug now to explain you why it went fail. Okay, just to have a clear idea in the initial days. Now, draggable, same thing, right? But still it failed. Reason behind that is this entire box is in frames. Okay, so what is frame? So frames are a component which are hosted on this web pages. Okay, so that is specific container that is independent of this HTML code. So even frame is in some HTML code, but that is separately prepared and they host it on this web page as a container, as a box. So let's say when developer is developing this application, he develop entire code and he leave this place. In this place, he will just bring that frame component and deploy it here, so that exactly that component falls into here. So that is how web people design that. They have kind of frame concept where they use it. So that's independent for us. But whenever there is such kind of frames in the web browser, like placing the containers in a box, Selenium cannot identify the frames. Okay, if you see frames in web application, you cannot handle that in a normal fashion, right? You need to tell Selenium that, hey, this is in frames, so handle it accordingly. You need to tell to Selenium before to do that. When you don't tell, it automatically thinks this ID is a part of this web browser and it checks entire HTML code and it will not find it. And if you tell, just go and check in a frame, then it knows and check the frames and then it identifies the element. That is the concept. Okay. So if you want to know about frames, you can simply say, I already have that search item in my, yeah. What are frames in web design? In the context of web browser, frame is a part of web page which displays content independent as a container. Okay. And the HTML that go in this frame, like whatever we see draggable, may not come from the same website, okay, as the other elements display. So definition itself says, as the other elements display, the elements in the frame doesn't display in the web page, may come from outside of the website. If that is the case, we need to tell our Selenium same. So how do you tell to your Selenium WebDriver saying, go into frame and handle it? Okay, for that, there is a method, driver dot switch. So basically we are switching from our driver web object to frames. Click on F and you see that there are three methods defined. You can pass frame number as an argument, so that if you specifically say frame 1 and if you give switch to frame of 1, so WebDriver goes and switch to that specific first frame in that web page and then try to identify the element. As it is switched to the frame, then it will get that ID object. Okay. Or if you can switch to the frame using web element as well, or frame ID. Okay. If you know the frame ID, pass the frame ID so that driver will switch to that. If you don't know frame ID, you can pass index like first frame or second frame. If you don't know either index or frame ID, you can pass web element of that frame. Let's try to understand all these three methods. Okay, I'll explain you these three. Maybe it looks confusing to you right now. So switch to, now let's go back to Firefox and try to understand what was this frame ID. Okay, so one tricky or one key point I'll tell you, when you spy using your Firebug or Firepath, and keep an eye on this left side. In general, it will display as window. For example, I'll click on this resizable and you see the top window. That means it's part of window only. But when I click on this, you see this is changing something like iframe. So that means with this you can come to a basic conclusion that I guess it is in frame. Okay. So one thing is script will fail saying object is not found. Whenever you see that kind of error, keep an eye onto the left side and see if it is something called frame. And that means you can come to conclusion that this was into that box. Now, how to find a frame? You will not get frame from Firepath. If you see that, you will never find information about the frame. To see that, you need to come back to your either HTML code or you can say inspect element. Okay, so unfortunately the frame information you will not get it from that specific Firepath. So you see here, when I say inspect element, this is draggable, right? Go up to see, let me maximize, and you see it here, iframe. And when I move my mouse, it selected entire this box. So that means I know that this is the frame. Okay, when I close this and that is going, that means this is inside this frame. Now I want to switch to this frame so that my Selenium understands and come to here and identify the element. Okay, so that's the concept. Now our next challenge is how we can switch to this frame. As I said here, you can switch either by string or frame ID or web element. So in using this one of these three methods, you can switch to this frame. Right. So in the next lecture, let's see how can we switch to this frame by passing a relevant argument. Meanwhile, I want you to just try around. If you have Eclipse in front of you, parallelly working with me, just see how can I switch to this frame, right? And I'll explain you in the next lecture. Thank you.